And later, Tariq Ali and Israeli Professor Barry Rubin debate the issues at stake in the Middle East. Jakarta is still reeling from the bomb attack on the Mariott Hotel and on high alert for tomorrow's sentencing of alleged Bali bomber Amrozi. In a moment, I'll be speaking with Wimar Witelar, Indonesian commentator and former presidential advisor. But first, some background by Irene Ulman.
The blast hit just after midday. The car bomb ripping through the five-star hotel in central Jakarta. The American Mariott Hotel is located close to embassies and other foreign interests. It's been a preferred location for visiting heads of state, including Australian Prime Minister John Howard. The Prime Minister preferred to emphasise that the target was Indonesia and not the Western world.
Although it took place outside a hotel which is frequented by Westerners and seen as something of a Western symbol, the victims were the men and women of Indonesia.
It was Indonesian hotel workers and taxi drivers parked outside who bore the brunt of the massive explosion. Nothing could diminish the shock, but the attack, a suspected suicide bombing, was not exactly a surprise.
To the best of my knowledge, we didn't have any specific information in relation to the Mariott Hotel, but of course we've been concerned about possible attacks, and our travel advisory has warned Australians to defer all non-essential travel to Indonesia, and has also warned of the possibility of terrorist attacks, including in international hotels. So this sort of incident is the sort of incident that we'd have to say is very tragic, but is not entirely unexpected.
The threat of an attack has loomed large since last October. The Bali blasts were the handiwork of a radical group, Jemaah Islamiyah, now the prime suspect in yesterday's bombing.
It does have, at this early stage, all the hallmarks of Jemaah Islamiyah. They have the motive, they have the intention, and they have the capability.
And there are links between yesterday's blast and other events, which may well be more than a coincidence. On the day of the explosion in Jakarta, the spiritual leader of Jemaah Islamiyah, Abu Bakar Bashir, was giving evidence at his treason trial streets away from the Mariott. And in another link, the man accused of masterminding the Bali bombing, Amrozi, is being sentenced for his crime tomorrow.
Whether this explosion took place because of those events, you just don't know at this stage. It's possible.
Terrorism experts warn that despite a series of arrests, the region may have to brace itself for further violence.
The message is very clear. If you are not going after the leadership of JI, they are going to strike you again. They will do an attack even worse than what we have seen in Bali or in Jakarta.
There are doubts that President Megawati Sukarnoputri is capable of controlling political extremists in her country. And there are fears that a crackdown may inspire a further backlash.
I spoke with Indonesian commentator Wimar Witelar a short time ago from Jakarta on the impact of the bombing on his city and the nation. Wimar Witelar, thanks for joining us. This is
Thank you.
This is a tragedy for Indonesia, of course. One bombing can look unlucky, but 2 or 3 major bombings is starting to look like a concerted campaign.
Yes, we are really suffering in multiples, both from the tragedy as well as from the impact on our image. The confidence is shaken, but nothing tops the human tragedy of those who were killed and injured.
Well, there has been a growing sense of confidence in the government over the past 12 months. Some of the militant groups seem to be on the run. The Bali trial was progressing. There was a sense of optimism that the state was gaining control. Where is that confidence today?
I was having lunch with the Australian ambassador just the day before the bombing, and we both agreed that we are rejoicing in the return of confidence in our peace. But we do know that terrorism does not necessarily have to be the work of a large group of people. Just a few people, with perverted minds, extremist thoughts, can throw havoc into the best efforts to maintain the peace. So we are suffering at the hand of a handful of radicals, extremists, and suicidal killers.
Well, most international speculation has been placed upon Jemaah Islamiyah on the eve of the sentencing in the Bali trial. Is the same conclusion being reached in Jakarta?
Well, here we are not in the mood to engage in speculation, since those kind of conclusions are pretty obvious, and it's the privilege of observers to draw those conclusions. Here we tend to be more cautious and look at things step by step, since the intelligence community is working, the authorities, the police are really on track, and the media has lots of access to the facts. So we can follow things fact by fact, step by step. Speculation just throws a lot of noise into the picture.
Well, it does help clarify the picture sometimes in Indonesia. I don't think there's ever been a bombing in Indonesia where the army itself hasn't been at least suspected or accused of some involvement. Is there any suspicion in this instance that elements of the army or intelligence have been protecting JI or have been directly involved with them?
Not even that. I belong to those who in the past have quickly thrown suspicion on various groups in Indonesia. But now with our long experience, 5 years, but it seems very long, of wrong suspicions and unfulfilled plans to uncover these plots, we are not really in the mood to accuse or to speculate, because this is such a serious problem. Plus, the whole country is being suspected by the international community. That is very, very sad. You see, if a bomb goes off in New York, everybody rallies behind America. America gets all the sympathy. A bomb goes off in Jakarta, Indonesia is a suspect. And you must remember that the only country which has at least had some success in uncovering the plot behind the bombing is Indonesia with the Bali bomb, where Indonesian police, in cooperation with Australian police, I should say, has come a long way into bringing these people to trial. Nothing has happened in the World Trade Center. America just throws its attention from one topic to the other, while leading the international world to throw suspicion on Indonesian society as a whole. I think that's the double tragedy we are experiencing.
Sir, could I just ask you though, why do you feel you have the feeling that the international community is in fact judging Indonesia itself over this event?
It's just not a feeling, but you can just go through the websites, through the international media. Always when the bomb goes off in Indonesia, it's seen as not an exception to the rule. It's seen as not odd to the common behavior of the people. It's seen as logical. It's seen as part of the backdrop of a tradition of Muslim extremism. So I think Indonesia is suffering from that image.
Well, of course, the backdrop of Muslim extremism is a reality. Has the government done enough to crack down on these groups? Does it have the political will to do so?
This government doesn't have the political will to do anything. Corruption has gone rampant, human rights abuse has gone that way, regional autonomy has gone astray, but in terms of security, they're not doing that badly. I would say this is one mark on the report card, which is not as low as some of the other areas.
Well, on the question of the Bali trials, have those trials fostered more support for Jemaah Islamiyah within the community, more anti-Western feeling?
No, nobody supports Jemaah Islamiyah. We read about them in foreign media. They get glamorized by the foreign press. Around here, we are devoting our attention on constructive things and staying away from troublemakers, certainly not endorsing them.
Well, but how have those trials been received by the general community and indeed the military and intelligence community?
Well, they are not received with that much attention because there's a lot of skepticism towards courts in Indonesia in general. But having said that, I would say that the trials in the terrorism issue would be at least more fair than those which have been held, say, in corruption cases or in other legal cases. So the trials do not have a negative rating, but they do not command much attention either, because people sort of just leave it to the courts. It's not something on which to generate mass hysteria.
Well, this particular attack is, of course, an attack upon an American asset, but could it more so be seen as an attack upon the Indonesian government itself? If the government is now forced to take a harder line on Islamic groups, could that divide society and force more people to join the radical cells?
90% of the assets in Jakarta are owned by international companies. All the property is owned by offshore funding. So this is no more American than the next building. And the victims are mostly Indonesian. So I don't think there's an issue, a bilateral issue involved here. It is an attack against the Indonesian people by extremists, by terrorists, by killers who happen to be also Indonesian.
Well, as you say, the government has had some success in rounding up Jemaah Islamiyah, but how successful ultimately will they be on this? How deeply rooted is that organisation within the population?
Not very deeply. They are fringe radicals who have been, their types have been around for a while, but now their presence is more visible because they have learned the trick of international terrorism and how to capitalize on the press and how to make use of the preconceptions people have against groups of that kind. So they are visible far beyond their number, far beyond their significance. It is a task for leaders of public opinion to throw them back into the shadows of public consciousness.
So just lastly, do you expect more attacks to come?
I hope not. Expectations, one learns not to predict the future in a country like ours.
Wima Witala, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.